Hello everyone, my name is Meghan LeVota and I offer wisdom, tools, and support for personality integration. Today I'm going to be discussing the cognitive function of extroverted thinking. And this is continuing on my series about all the cognitive functions where I'm going to be explaining in my own words what they mean. And these 8 cognitive functions were originally identified by Carl Jung in his book Psychological Types. This has gone on to inspire the MBTI personality test and socionics and others. For those of you who are new, I definitely recommend looking into Carl Jung's Psychological Types and Lenore Thompson's Personality Type and Owner's Manual, and among others. There's lots of resources out there. The purpose of this video is for me to explain what is extroverted thinking in my own words from my research and studies. So yeah, and I definitely recommend to sort of compare what I say about extroverted thinking to what I say about extroverted feeling, and sort of compare the functions like that. Because, so just to get into it, extroverted thinking is one of the judging functions. There are perceiving functions and there are also judging functions. And the judging functions really just describe the ways that we are processing and judging the information that we see. How are we making sense of it? Are we using thinking or are we using feeling? Whereas the perceiving functions are, what are we even seeing? So there are kind of 2 questions that you ask yourself when you are processing information. What is it that I'm seeing? Literally, like, that's your perception, which you use either sensing or intuition. And then there's, okay, what about the thing that I'm seeing? Like what judgment can you place on it? How are you going to define it logically? How are you going to value it with your feeling function? So yeah, extroverted thinking, as it is an extroverted judging function, it is based on the objective world. And I've already talked about this in all of my other videos, but just in case you haven't watched those, the introverted functions are based on your subjective, you as a subject. Everything is filtered through you. And so I talk about the introverted functions. If you want to learn more about that, look at those videos. But with the cognitive functions, to be an extroverted function just means that it is dependent upon the objects in the external world. So this is different from how introverted functions are dependent upon you as a subject, and everything for example, introverted perceiving, everything you see is filtered through all the impressions of everything you've seen, where for introverted judging, everything you judge is filtered through your personal values or your personal sense of truth. Where when we're talking about, so for extroverted feeling and extroverted thinking, which I already did my video on extroverted feeling, these 2 extroverted judging functions are focused on what is the data that I can observe externally, and how can I use that data to make sense of things. So really, I misspoke a little bit. The external observing would be extroverted sensing and extroverted intuition. But when you look outside of you and you have all this data in front of you, and then you use that to make a judgment, that is extroverted judging. Whereas extroverted feeling is picking up the emotional data, the emotional cues, the social norms, and is based off values and ethics, and using that information to make a decision to move forward. Extroverted thinking is the complete opposite of that. In fact, extroverted thinking, when I say objective, is probably going to describe what most of you, when you hear the word objective, what sort of connotations you have with that word. Because when most people think of objective, they're thinking about logic, where extroverted thinking is a objective judging function that is focused on logic and reasoning. So it doesn't mean that everything that TE does is going to be the capital T truth all the time, but it might be pretty darn close. At least that's the goal. That's the goal of extroverted thinking. Just as I mentioned that introverted thinking seeks truth and will constantly be refining what they believe is truth until they find the universal truth, combining everything. Extroverted thinking, it's going to be a lot harder to argue with extroverted thinking because it is self-evident. It is based on the objective facts. Sometimes, though, with extroverted thinking, they might not be aware of how some of their own personal emotional judging might be influencing that data, but extroverted thinking is going to try really hard. I mean, what they're looking at is the objective logic of the situation. A good way to think of it is like the scientific method. The scientific method to conduct an experiment in the external world is sort of manipulating the external objects in order to learn objective facts about the objects. And it's then the data, even though there's always going to be some sort of personal bias involved in science, the goal of science is to get rid of that as much as possible and to at least be aware of the factors that might be influencing that. So extroverted thinking, whether this is science or it's relationships or whatever, they're going to look at the facts of the matter and use those facts to make decisions. So I have also developed keywords to help people understand what the cognitive functions are. I'm not the first person to come up with keywords, so they might even other people who discuss typology have their own keywords. And this keyword is not meant to, completely define everything that TE is, but I refer to TE as it seeks efficacy. It wants things to work. And it looks at the facts of all of these objects and it knows what to input in order to get a certain output. And this is contrary to how extroverted feeling is focused on creating mutual benefit and making decisions that benefit both or multiple parties. And it is less focused on finding a solution that works. Because for extroverted feeling, if a solution doesn't consider the needs of all of the people and isn't trying to create benefit for everyone, then it's not a good solution. There's no value in that solution. Therefore, why should we even pursue that solution? That's something that extroverted feeling might say. Where extroverted thinking, it's like trying to find a solution that fits within the bounds of the external world's limitations or rules or boundaries. It's like, I have this much time to complete this task. I have this many people willing to help me. I have, these are the deliverables that are needed in order to create this outcome. And so TE will decide. Both FE and TE are ways to decide And so while FE is reaching a ethical or value or a consensus of values, TE is looking for a consensus of all the facts. TE won't want to ignore some of the facts. They're going to need to take everything into consideration in order to actually find something that works. Where introverted thinking is more okay with just thinking something through, almost hypothetically, extroverted thinking wants to know, does this tool do the job? Is this just a good idea? Does this make sense in your head? Or does this actually work with people, with things? Like, the idea is great, but TE might say, well, let's prove it, or let's try it out, let's experiment, let's test it. I've noticed that TE users tend to really like tests or experiments, and although they might seem to be the type of people, if we're talking about TJs here, which, by the way, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, hopefully you guys already know this, but ESTJ, ENTJ, INTJ, and ISTJ are the 4 types that have strong extroverted thinking naturally. For them, they might seem like the type that is always forcing their opinion on you, or like that they're trying to act like know-it-alls. It might seem that way because their logic is so extroverted that it's kind of in your face. It's hard to ignore. Like, you know what they're thinking. They're a lot more humble than you might think. And I'm saying this as an ENFJ who doesn't use strong extroverted thinking. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm trying really hard in this video to use some extroverted thinking so that I can get through to you guys because, yeah, anyway, they're a lot more humble than you might think in the sense that they will consider all facts, all valid points. And if you can prove it that you're right and that they're wrong, TE users are going to listen because they aren't clinging to their own sense of truth the way that TI is. They want to get the job done. So if you have a better idea for how to get the job done, then tell them. Like, they are not attached to their opinions. And one way to sort of parallel this is to look at extroverted feeling and introverted feeling. In general, if you're wanting to understand these cognitive functions and not just know the definitions, I recommend really paralleling the way that FE works with the way that TE works. And then also the way that FI works, and the way that TI works. Because FE and TE are parallel, FI and TI are parallel, whereas TE and FI exists on a judging axis, and FE and TI exists on a judging axis. So if you guys have more questions about that, or if you want me to make a video explaining that, please just let me know if I'm saying anything that goes over your head and that you need more explanation on. But, what I was going to say is that just as extroverted feeling is really focused on just making sure that the emotions of the group are at least considered, that doesn't mean that they're always going to bend over backwards for everyone, because perhaps FE will consider all of the emotions and then find that some emotions are more important than others, or that they weigh all the options and they realize that this is the best way to go because it's going to create less harm, and it's at least considering and at least surveying all of the emotions. Extroverted thinking works in a parallel way where they want to consider all arguments, but some arguments they might assess and find that they are logically invalid, and so they will throw those out. And TE works in tandem with introverted feeling, so this might have their understanding of what's invalid might have something to do with what they value, but when we're looking at TE in isolation and not just people, it really is going to just be, I'm going to survey these arguments, these facts. I'm going to, look at, I think cause and effect is also a good keyword. And that's why TE is good at getting things to work. They are systems thinkers. TJs are very strategic about what to do in order to get a certain result. And that's why they tend to be good at business, because business is something where business isn't just thinking through theoretically. Like, you can be really smart and also be really bad at business. And, I'm not saying that every TE user is good at business, but in general, if we're looking at introverted thinking, they might have the best idea ever, but have no clue how to actually get it to work. And that's where extroverted thinking comes in, where they know what to do. I mean, like, not always, but these are the people that you go to when you want to know, like, what to do. Because they can get it done. They are going to consider all of the factors and will make a decision that is consistent with those factors. So, and as an ENFJ, as someone with strong extroverted feeling and weak extroverted thinking, I am not so great at that, because it's almost impossible to focus on that while also focusing on everything I focus on. So, and on the other hand, that a lot of people with strong extroverted thinking, they might come off as cold, or they might completely be ignoring the emotional messages that are being sent in the room. Because for them, as long as they're doing something that works, then everyone should be happy, right? It shouldn't be much more complicated than that, right? So they can tend to ignore the emotional factors. Because a big thing with TE is that they want to be able to measure things. Like, if something is not measurable, TE might ignore it. And correct me if I'm wrong, TE users, but that is certainly what it seems like to me, is that because extroverted thinking is, external and objective, it wants to be able to measure it. It wants to be able to see it. I feel like extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, the factors that I tend to look at are a lot harder to measure. That's why I'm interested in psychology and sociology. It's not so black and white to be able to measure those things. And, TE will try its best to figure out how to measure things, because if you can't measure it, then you can't really assess it. So anyway, I've talked a little bit longer than I wanted to about this. So yeah, extroverted judging function, focus on extroverted judging function that's focused on logic and reasoning. It's extroverted thinking, and they're focused on making things work. And without them, we wouldn't have systems that work. So, thank you for watching. If you are not sure what your personality type is, I do offer personality typing services that are linked below. And the way that I think about these things is that you know yourself more than I do. And so if you just are wanting to learn about the functions and you don't know where to start, or like how to apply the functions to yourself, then all you have to do is open up to me a little bit about your strengths and weaknesses, your struggles. You're gonna have to be willing to sort of share, be a little bit vulnerable with me, so that I can see the tidal waves of how your life has gone, because I can help you figure out what your type might be and give you options of what I think makes sense, but only if you are willing to be vulnerable with me and share with me the sort of graph of how your life typically goes, if that makes sense. So I have that below. I also have mentorship. And another just announcement, sorry that I have so many announcements, is that on October 26th, I am doing a meetup in LA that if you are in the area, please check out the link below. Because yeah, I'd love to see some people there. So tell your friends if you happen to know anyone that is a personality enthusiast in LA. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for watching.